Welcome back to Veronica Live, and we're here with our first guest this morning, and that is Chairman Bob White. He is the chairman of the Florida Republican Liberty Caucus, and I've recently joined this organization, and we're trying to make a presence here in the Panhandle, and so I'm so proud and happy to have Bob on because, Bob, you're a busy guy, so welcome to Veronica Live.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to be joining you this morning.
So Bob, for people that don't know what the Republican Liberty Caucus is, tell us what our mission is.
We refer to ourselves as the conscience of the Republican Party. We're never afraid to hold the party accountable when necessary, and we're never afraid to hold an elected Republican accountable when necessary. We try to work within the party as much as we possibly can. Even though we're not officially connected to the party in any way. We're not a Republican club that's, been chartered by a local Republican executive committee. We're not chartered by the Republican Party of Florida. Our national organization does not fall under the RNC in any way, shape, or form, but we do encourage our members to also be members of their local RECs. We want to try to move the party back in the direction of what we consider its roots, the Jeffersonian principles of personal liberty, limited government, and free markets. And so everything that we do, the positions that we take, the candidates that we vet for endorsement, those kinds of things, everything comes back to those three principles, which we consider to be the foundational principles for what the Republican Party really ought to be all about.
Well, and, my first experience was a couple weeks ago in Tallahassee with our organization. You had about 140 people that had partnered with Defend Florida, I think, was there with us. And we were there for 2 days for lobby days, running around. And I loved, Bob, that we got to get in front of legislators. And I actually was in front of them. We had a sheet with 20 bills that we supported, and we told them what we thought, highlighted things, and really we were in their face. So what were I guess you've been doing this all along. I was so excited because I felt like, I was making a difference, fighting for something.
Well, you were making a difference, and that's why we do that every year. It's interesting the way we're organized. We have local chapters at the county level, and those local chapters will get involved in local issues and with local office holders. We tell our local chapters that they're free to make endorsements in whatever city council, county commission, school board races, et cetera, that they want to at that level. And then the RLC of Florida, which I chair that board and that organization, we're involved at the state level with state issues, and we make endorsements in races where candidates are running for the Florida House or the Florida Senate. We vet them thoroughly before deciding whether or not we're going to endorse them. And then, of course, the next step in that process after helping them get elected is, of course, to have an impact on the legislation that they're pursuing in Tallahassee. So that's a huge part of what we do. And we've been doing it for a long time. This is my 9th year as chairman of the state organization. I chaired my local chapter for 14 years up until just this past May. And so I've been going back and forth to Tallahassee myself, doing lobby days for the last probably 13 or 14 years. And it's really grown considerably. Back in the early days when I first started doing this, we might have 11 or 12 people going up there from maybe 2 or 3 counties where we had chapters. Now, of course, we've grown considerably over the last 5 or 6 years, and we now have chapters in 35 counties. So, last year I think we had 90 people at our lobby days event, and then, as you said, this year Defend Florida reached out and they wanted to participate with us, and so we said, well, sure, come on along because your issues are our issues. They're election integrity issues, and so this year, as you said, we had between 120 and 140 people that were there, and the difference is incredible when you get that many people and they're traveling in groups of maybe 8 or 10 or 12 or more sometimes, office to office to office. And our goal is to get in front of every Republican member of the House and the Senate, if only to just drop off the package and have a few minutes with them to say, these are our priorities for you this year, for this session, and explain, have an opportunity to explain, why we believe the things we believe about these different issues. And then this is critical. At the end of every legislative session, we then do a scorecard. We take 20 bills that we consider to be liberty bills, and we grade these legislators based on how they voted on these 20 bills, and we published that. And it's really eye-opening when you take a look at these legislators that are so-called Republicans, and you see that most of them are getting a C or a C minus or maybe a C plus, a few Bs and very few As. I think this last session, I think we had 3 As, all in the House, no As in the Senate. But most of these Republicans are scoring Cs or C minuses. So there's a lot of work to be done to open their eyes to what the people really expect them to be doing for us in Tallahassee.
Well, I guess what I was most shocked by was, they didn't know all of these bills. And then I guess you have to have somebody, a senator and a representative to try to move them forward as companions. And I know one of the ones I talked to was involved in election integrity and getting that stamp on a driver's license that says you're not an American. Because I'm a veteran, I have the veteran stamp, and that's one of the ways to make sure that somebody that's not an American isn't voting in our election. And they all lit up when I brought up that bill, and they loved it. So it was just amazing that they didn't know every single bill. I guess they're very busy. So that bill was important to me. And then the other one that really shocked me, Bob, that I want you to get into was the buying a long gun. Right now it's 21 after the Parkland shooting, and trying to get that back down to 18 because, I learned during our 2 days that once people are elected and go up there, they forget about the Second Amendment a little bit when they're in Tallahassee.
Yeah, it's a very difficult environment right now, especially on the Senate side, because the current Senate President, Kathleen Pasadomo, she's down in the Collier County, Naples area, and she's very anti-Second Amendment. And so she serves 2 sessions. This is her last session. So at the end of this session, she'll be termed out, and there'll be a new Senate President that'll be coming in. And of course, you were with us when our board met with Senator Albritton.
It was incredible.
Who will be the next Senate President for 2 years. He sat down with us we must have spent 45 minutes or an hour with him, which was great, and had a good discussion with him. And I think he'll be much more pro-Second Amendment, hoping he will be. And so we won't get any progress this year out of the legislature simply because of Senator Pasadomo's position. And as the Senate President, she wields tremendous power. So nobody's going to buck her, but hopefully we'll make some significant progress next year. Hopefully we'll get that age lowered from 21 back down to 18, where it should be. And then the other issues, of course, that are so important, and there are bills that we're tracking this year to try to, the red flag part of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas bill that was passed, that red flag ordinance, risk protection ordinances that that people get hammered with, where their firearms get confiscated without them even knowing that somebody has filed a complaint against them, and then they have to go into court to try to prove their innocence. Basically, instead of being innocent until proven guilty, they come and take your firearms. You have no idea that somebody's made a complaint against you, and then you have to go into court to try to get them back. And if you can't afford an attorney, they will not appoint one for you because they've classified it as a civil, not a criminal. So there's legislation this year that would at least provide that if you have to go into court and can't afford an attorney, the state will pay for one for you, because it can be very expensive to go through that process. We're talking thousands of dollars, $10,000, $20,000 in some jurisdictions, even more. So it's very difficult. So that's a very important piece of legislation. And then we do have a bill filed this year. Mike Beltran filed it. That would be a true constitutional carry bill. It's not going to go anywhere, for all of the reasons that we just discussed. But he did file it, and so hopefully he'll come back and file it again next year. And we're going to keep the pressure on and try to make sure that they move in the right direction, and we actually get some of these bills passed in the next couple of sessions.
Bob, this is John Salick. I met you back when you were running for governor in 2018, and I was the state committee man from Bay County here on
okay,
ARPA.
Great.
And we had some extensive talks about corruption in Tallahassee. And by the way, you were running for all the right reasons. You really were, and I was glad you finished as well as you did. But you you've seen the sausage. You know, that's why I was laughing at some of the stuff Veronica's discovered. She's discovering the sausage making.
It's awful. I don't like sausage making.
It's bad. It really is.
But you know, one of your issues, you know, when we talked previously, was this corruption, this soft corruption up there, and we kind of ran into some of that last week. We were talking with Gary James, who's running SD7 Senate District.
Jerry
7
James.
Yeah,
right.
over in St. John's against Tom Leak. And one of the things he was mentioning was how Tom Leak had, when he started in the Senate, his net worth was like $800,000, and now it's over $14 million. And then you look at
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you look at his contributions, not his official page, you know, on the Secretary of State's, you know, website, but his PAC. You know, there's millions of dollars flowing into his PAC, and it's not just him; it's all of them. Okay, so this corruption, and I think Alan Bentz, former Speaker House, Alan Bentz once described it to me as a soft corruption, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. You know, how do you differentiate between soft and hard? But it's corruption nonetheless, and I've noted this year that the number of personal member requests has gone up 30% from last year. There are over $7 billion in the House and $7 billion in the Senate in personal member requests. I guess you call them earmarks at the federal level.
Right.
And I think our Senator Trumbull, who represents us, is the number 2 requester in this stuff.
Well,
how do you fix this stuff? Is it possible to get rid of these PACs? I mean, this really is corruption at a base level.
Yeah, we refer to this as the legal laundering of campaign cash because they are laundering the money. And here's how they do it. You mentioned political committees. A lot of people think that there's a limit on the size of the contribution that you can make to a candidate that's running for the Florida House or the Florida Senate, and there is a limit. You can only give $1,000 if you're giving it to their campaign account. That's the max you can give. But the problem is that they can also have a political committee that they establish. Each one of these legislators, even a candidate or other groups, can have political committees, and the contribution into a political committee is unlimited. So Tom Leak, for instance, or any one of these persons, not to single him out necessarily, they have their campaign account, then they have a political committee. So what difference does it make that there's a contribution limit when they can get $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 contributed into their political committee? And so what ends up happening is that every industry, every association, every union, doesn't matter what it is, every profession that has an association, they all have their own political committees that they've established. And so they raise millions of dollars in their political committees, or if you're a Florida Power and Light, or if you're a U.S. Sugar, or if you're the Florida Teachers Union, you just dump $1 million or $10 million if you're FPL. Or one of the other utilities into your political committee, and then you give that to other political committees, and they then give it to other political committees that ultimately give it to a candidate's political committee. And then at that point, when the candidate files their report, all they have to list is the name of that last political committee that made the contribution. So you'd have to be a forensic accountant, basically, to be able to track all this money back to its original source.
Yep.
And the real problem becomes this. Here's the real problem, and this is why we have such a hard time moving really good legislation through the two chambers, and that is that the Senate President and the House Speaker, the Speaker of the House, they are so powerful that they have the ability to raise tens of millions of dollars more than anybody else can, and they do it in multiple PACs. I mean, I know when I ran briefly for Commissioner of Agriculture, I wasn't able to finish the campaign because I had some health issues going on at the time. But Wilson Simpson, who was the Senate President at the time and was running for Ag Commissioner, he had 4 different political committees that we know of, and each one of those political committees had over $13 million in each one of those 4 different political committees that he was operating at the time. And so all of these rank and file members of the House and the Senate, they know that the Speaker and the Senate President can either reward or punish them depending on whether or not they support leadership's slate of legislation and whether or not they go along with the priorities of leadership. And so when a Kathleen Passidomo says to her chamber indirectly, no gun bills this year, they listen because they're scared to death. I mean, we've literally had people tell us, not necessarily this session or last session, but in past sessions, we've gone to people that we know are friendly to these issues, and they say, "You think I'm going to?" No, the president's already said, or the speaker's already said, "I'm not filing that bill. Why would I file that bill? If I file that bill, he'll kill all the rest of my legislation. I won't get anything else done that I need done, or I won't be able to get the money back to my district, that I've petitioned, for, that I've applied, I've applied from." And in some cases, not all the funding requests are illegitimate. In some cases, there are legitimate concerns back in districts that they're trying to bring money home for, and they're scared to death to buck leadership because they know that they'll get zeroed out. So that's how they maintain control over the chamber. So the solution then, I think, is the campaign finance reform that we need is, number one, you have to eliminate, if possible, the ability of these political committees to give money to each other, because that's how the money gets laundered. That's how it gets hidden from view of the public. So if you could get that one step, I think would be significant. I don't think you'd ever be able to outlaw them altogether, simply because it's already, money is considered speech, if you will. The Supreme Court's already said that in some of these cases that have happened at the federal level. So trying to zero these political committees out is probably not possible. But if you could at least get them get something passed so that they couldn't contribute to each other, that would go a long way.
The thing I don't understand, Bob, is from a legislator, a candidate and a political committee have to be separate. It is illegal for a candidate to manipulate a political action committee for his own benefit, or her benefit. And yet everybody blinks and nods, because you actually read the names of these things, and it's, political committee for the betterment of Florida on behalf of Tom Leak, and it's like, well, what's that all about? It's illegal for a candidate or representative to have a PAC, yet they all have them and they all control them, and nobody has ever been charged, right?
Not at the state.
Oh, not state level.
It is not illegal. See, there's federal statute that governs federal elections and governs federal political committees, political action committees, etc. But at the state level, it's all in state statute, and there's nothing that prevents a sitting legislator or a candidate from having their own political committee. And some of it is just the name of the political committee might be Friends of Tom Leak, might be the name of the committee. Sometimes they come up with a different name, like launching Liberty on the Space Coast or something like that might be the name of the committee. But there's no question about it. It is the committee that is associated with the candidate, and everybody knows it. And it's a big business when it comes right down to it. And these, as I said, just a quick story. We have a guy in Brevard County named Thad Altman, who's if you looked up career politician, the dictionary definition, it would have a picture of Thad next to it. He was a county commission for 8 years, went to Tallahassee and did 8 years in the Florida House, went over to the Florida Senate and did 10 years. He got an extra 2 because of redistricting. And then he went back to the Florida House for another 8 years because the term limit has the word continuous in it. So you can term out in one chamber and go to the other chamber for a term and then go back to the other chamber if you wanted to. So that's what he did. So he went back to the House for another 8 years. But when he was running for re-election as a senator, as a state senator, he established his own political committee, and he raised $320-something thousand in that political committee, 100% of which came from Andy Gardner's political committee. Andy Gardner was the president of the Florida Senate at the time. So the president of the Florida Senate gave one of his senators that was running for re-election $320,000, and the senator got reelected, lo and behold. So who do you think he was loyal to when he went back to Tallahassee? The guy that gave him the $320,000 or his constituents? I would say that it was the guy that gave him the $320,000 and not his constituents that he had the most loyalty to. So that's how they manipulate these guys.
That's insane.
You've got a guy out in the Panhandle, a good friend of mine, great legislator. His name is Mike Hill. He was a great legislator.
Yeah, he was.
But he pushed back against leadership. It was a gun bill. He filed a constitutional carry bill, and the speaker came to him and said, "Don't," or he was going to file it, and the speaker said, "Don't file that bill." I see that you've got it in bill drafting, and we're not having any gun bills this year, so don't file that bill. And he said, look, Mr. Speaker, I respect your authority. I understand that this is your chamber for the next 2 years, but I promised my constituents that I would file this bill, and I'm going to file the bill. And he did, and lo and behold, the leadership at the time, they found somebody to run against him, and they funded her campaign, to however much she needed in order to be able to take him out. And that's the reason that Mike Hill is not a member of the Florida legislature right now, because he was independent enough and brave enough to live up to a promise he had made to his constituents when he was running, and they took him out. They punished him for it.
Yeah, that's just awful.
That's the power that they have.
We saw that here in the Panhandle there, because our former state senator George Gaynor was handpicked by the Senate leadership, and then they dumped a pile of money in, and it basically scared everybody away because he had so many millions of dollars in money.
Right.
And then when he termed out, he waited till the last second past.
Literally the last day.
Right, and then said, I'm not running, and all of a sudden Jay Trumbull, our representative, has all his paperwork ready to run for Senate on the last day of filing. Just like that.
Just like that.
Slides in and no opposition. And it was like, this is so freaking crooked, it's not even funny.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, Bob, because I know we're running out of time, but one of the huge things that the Republican Liberty Caucus does is you endorse these candidates, and I want people to go to our rlcfl.org, and you can see the candidate questionnaire, and it's very, very extensive. Just like in the Second Amendment section, there's like 10 questions, and I know RLC has endorsed Keith Gross, but I wanted you to talk about the power of these endorsements, because you've endorsed, some big names, and it's a very intense questionnaire if you make it through.
Yeah, we've actually it's an interesting process. During the last election cycle, which was the 2022 election cycle, we had over 120 candidates for the Florida House and Senate that came to us wanting our endorsement, and of course they have to sign our Liberty Compact and they have to complete the questionnaire. We then look at the questionnaire, we review it to determine whether or not they're even worthy of an interview. So of 120 plus that filled out the questionnaire, we ended up interviewing about 83 or 4 of them, I think. So about 40 didn't even make the cut for an actual interview. So we get together, we have a vetting committee, that gets together. There's usually 5 or 6 of us on the phone call with the legislator, and we review the questionnaire with them. We also grill them, bring up other issues, and try to get more information about their background. So it's very extensive, and we've actually had candidates tell us that their questionnaire was that our questionnaire was educational for them, that we were raising issues that they had not even considered or even had a chance to think through these issues all the way. So they actually learned a lot just by completing our questionnaire. And we interview them extensively, and then, they drop off the phone call and we stay on the call and make a decision whether or not we're going to recommend this person to our full board of directors for an actual endorsement. And so of the 80 something that made the cut for the interview, some of them were running against each other because we're making endorsements in primaries. Now, this is very important because that's one of the things that differentiates us because we're not sanctioned by the party, because we're not a club, we make endorsements in primaries. The party typically doesn't do that, although at the state level they'll violate their own rule, and make an endorsement at the state level, even though they're not supposed to. But at the local level, your local clubs and your local RECs typically don't endorse in primaries. We do. That's very critical. So, it's a winnowing process, if you will. 80 some odd that are interviewed, but many of them are running against each other. So we ended up endorsing, I think, 40 something in the actual primary, and then I think it was I believe it was 19 of those that we endorsed made it through the primary and the general election, and then 9 of our candidates actually won their general election campaigns. But it builds up over the years. So that was just 9 from that one freshman class in that one election cycle. But going back through multiple cycles, we end up with a significant number of people in the House and in the Senate that have gotten endorsements from us in the past. But now we're in the process. We've got something new that we've just launched called Liberty First 2024, Restoring the Republic. which, we were talking about those nasty political committees, but, guess what? We've got one. It's called the Liberty Catalyst Fund. And as hard as we work to try to accomplish campaign finance reform, we're not going to fail to use the tools that are available to us. So we are raising money for our political committee, and the intention is to use that money to try to help our endorsed candidates get elected. So we've got an antidote account set up. You can go to our website, rlcfl.org, and across the top of the menu bar, there's a tab out there that says contribute, and that would take you right to the contribution page for the Liberty Catalyst Fund. And again, 100% of that money is going to the candidates that we have vetted and endorsed. So everybody knows. A lot of people think that they're, they can only afford maybe $50 or $100, and that's not going to accomplish anything. But we have the ability through our antidote account. You can make a monthly contribution. So we've got people that are making, that can make a $15 or a $25 a month contribution, and know that because it's being combined with other $15 and $25 a month contributions from all over the state, that's significant, and the power of us all working together, regardless of the size of the contribution, it's still so important. And others will make larger contributions, and that's fine too. But every contribution is appreciated, regardless of its size, and 100% of that money is going to go to candidates. We don't pay any expenses out of that money. I travel the state pretty extensively, and the money comes out of my own pocket to do that. So the 100% of that money is going to go to elect thoroughly vetted liberty candidates, constitutional conservatives that are putting themselves out there and running for office. And we hope that ultimately that we're able to help enough of these guys get elected that we can establish an actual Freedom Caucus right there within the Florida legislature, like the Freedom Caucus that you see in Washington, D.C.
Love it. I know you've got to run, but the one bill I was very intrigued about, real quick, is the term limits for county commissioners. We are desperate for that, Bill or Bob. So
yes, that's a great bill, and it is showing some life. It is giving some movement. But there was one committee that wanted to amend it to change it from 8 to 12. But we're trying to amend it back to 8. So each one of these bills has multiple committee stops that it has to go through in both chambers. It may have to go through 3 different committees before it finally makes its way onto the floor for a vote of the entire chamber. So we're trying to make sure that it stays at 8 and doesn't go to 12, and try to get that passed, because right now the only counties in Florida that can have term limits for their county commissioners and other offices are what they call charter counties, where the county has its own charter. I live in a charter county, Brevard County, Florida, and we have 8-year term limits for our county commissioners. But there's only either 20 or 21 charter counties in the state. So the other 46, 47 counties don't have term limits. So this bill would provide that, and it would be a mandatory thing.
Well, it would definitely help with corruption, but we'll have to have you back. It's Bob White. He's our chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus, and rlcfl.org. And Bob, thanks for joining us. You're doing great work, and it's actually right in front of the face of all these legislators that, we need to be in front of them.
Well, listen, I've really enjoyed it very much. I'll come back on as often as you'll have me. And for your listeners, just so they know, you are the new regional director for Northwest Florida for the Republican Liberty Caucus out in the Panhandle. And already you and I are working together to establish new local chapters in some of the different counties out there. So if your listeners are out there in the Panhandle, want to get involved and start a chapter in their county, they know who to call.
That's right. That's right. Well, have a great day, and Liberty, keep fighting the fight, Bob. Thanks. We'll be right.
Thanks for having me on.
We'll be right back on Veronica Live.
Okay.